Today is Israel's Independence Day, and I want to share with you the amazing story of the establishment of the State of Israel, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and the way that Israelis celebrate this amazing and celebratory day. Shalom, my friends. This is the Kiva Gersh with Israel in 5, where we give you everything Israel in 5 minutes. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, want to keep the conversation going, please do so below in the comments. So today's a special edition. It's going to be longer than 5 minutes. We need more time than that to tell the story, even briefly tell the story of the establishment of the State of Israel, tell a bit about the incredible story of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and again, how Israelis celebrate this amazing day. I'm outside today. I want you to see a little bit of the land of Israel. So here we go. I want to share with you a little bit about how the State of Israel was actually established. I think, there's so many people out there who love Israel or supporting Israel. It's amazing. But I believe the more we know about Israel, the more our love grows. And the more we know about the story of how Israel was established as a country and how many obstacles the Jewish people have to overcome in that process of establishing independence here in this land. Again, our love and admiration and support of Israel only grows. So let's take it back. Again, we'll do a brief run. This could be hours and hours and hours. It's an incredible and intricate history, but we'll do a brief telling of the story. We know that the Jewish people started in this land thousands of years ago, and about 2,000 years ago, were kicked out by the Romans when they were defeated in the year 70 CE at the end of what was called the Great Revolt, a 4-year war between the Jewish people here in this land and the Roman Empire. That revolt ended with defeat. It also ended with the destruction of Jerusalem, including the temple that stood there. It also ended with the Jewish people being sent into exile, right? And that exile lasted about 2,000 years. And the Jewish people eventually spread out all over the world, in Europe, of course, all over North Africa, around the Middle East, down into the Arabian Peninsula. And the Jewish people developed customs and traditions never to forget where they came from. Right? Of course, never to forget their language, even though it wasn't their everyday spoken language. It was still the language of prayer and of study. They had all kinds of traditions to remember Jerusalem. Every single day in the prayers of the Jewish people, Jerusalem is mentioned, Zion is mentioned, the return to Israel is mentioned. All kinds of other traditions escorted them through these 2,000 years of exile to help them never to forget where they originally come from. And it worked. It worked in a tremendous kind of way because the Jews never forgot. And even if we established great communities and even successful communities in various places, we knew that our deepest home, our truest home, was in the land of Israel. And in the 1880s, the Zionist movement begins primarily as a result and as a reaction to the horrible anti-Semitism that the Jewish people were facing in Europe for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And a small group of them eventually got fed up with it. They said, enough is enough. We're going home. It was a very tiny group, right? There was Jews in Russia after waves and waves of pogroms, the early 1880s. They said, we're done. We need to leave. Many Jews left Russia in general over those next few years and couple of decades, but most of them went to America or other places in Europe. A small group, at first just a total of 25,000 Jews from 1882 to 1904, came to the land of Israel. They said, we're not going to go to another land and wait for another time that they either oppress us or kick us out. We're going to go home and reestablish ourselves as a people in our homeland. And that was what we call the first Aliyah. Aliyah means to go to Israel, to move to Israel. It literally means in Hebrew to go up, right? To go up. Because we believe in Judaism that when a Jew comes to Israel, returns to Israel, it's a spiritual elevation for that person. So that was the first Aliyah, and they faced a lot of challenges, and many of these Jews had never been to the land of Israel, but they never had to live in such a place, such a climate, such a landscape. They had to start farming. There's very little happening in the land at that time. It was the Ottoman Empire, and there was like no development, no investment. There were a few 100,000 Arabs living, sparsely throughout the land in small villages. There were only a handful of cities. It wasn't a very developed area. Many of the Jews who came here during that first wave decided to create these tiny agricultural communities. Right? There were Jews already living there, about 25,000 actually, in the major cities, Jerusalem, Tzfat, Tiberias, and Hebron. But there were mostly ultra-Orthodox Jews who were spending their days learning and studying, living off of donations from Jews around the world who wanted to help Jews be in the land of Israel, studying and praying. But these Jews came with a different vision, and they started farming the land. Now, most of them were never farmers before. They had to learn how to farm on top of living in a whole new area. And the truth is, it didn't go so well for many of them. And it probably would have failed if it wasn't for one man, Baron Rothschild, who was a very wealthy French Jew who wanted Zionism to succeed, and he invested tremendously in it. And he pumped money into the project. These settlements, these agricultural settlements, communities, survived long enough to hold on. And then in 1904, a new wave of Aliyah, of Jews coming back, started from 1904 to 1914, the beginning of the First World War. And these Jews came, and they kind of jumped on the backs of the first Aliyah. They took advantage of the beginning steps that the first Aliyah made, and they added on to that. And they came with a stronger vision of statehood, of nationhood, of Jews. We're coming back and we're reestablishing ourselves as a people in our ancient homeland, with the hopes and dreams of creating our own country, our own independent country. And that was their vision. And it was very strong for them. And during those years of the second Aliyah, they really focused on working in the land, like it was started in the first Aliyah, reviving the Hebrew language as a spoken language, which they succeeded in doing, and Jews doing their own guard work. Right, all these communities needed guarding at the time against theft, but Jews felt like we're not guards. We don't do that kind of stuff. We don't use guns. We don't know how to use guns, and they would hire out Arabs or Russian Muslims who were in the area. And then in the second Aliyah, the Jews said, no, we need to do that. We need to learn how to physically protect ourselves again. We used to know how to do that. We're the sons and daughters of the Maccabees. Remember them? What happened to us? And so they started to form Jewish self-defense organizations in the years of the second Aliyah. Now, it's interesting. Let's just pause for a second. All these things that they were doing, the first Aliyah, the second Aliyah, took hold and took off and were successful and became the future of the state of Israel. These tiny little agricultural communities became eventually big towns and then cities. Places like Petach Tikva, Rishon LeZion, and others are now, you go there and they look like tremendous cities. Back in the day, there were small little, tiny little agricultural communities. And of course, these self-defense organizations that were started in the early years of the second Aliyah, the first one in 1909, eventually they were the beginning steps towards the IDF, right? One of the world's greatest armies. Moving forward, there's three more waves of Aliyah. Jews moving to the land of Israel stopped during the First World War, and then continued after that, right? The World War ended in 1918. All kinds of conferences around that time, 1918, 1919, figuring out what to do with the Middle East. Aliyah continues. Of course, after the First World War, the Ottomans lose control of the Middle East, and the British and the French come in and take over the land in these things called mandates, right, given to them by the League of Nations, newly formed after the First World War. The British were given the mandate over Palestine. And that mandate was all about, as it is written in the document itself, helping the Jews to establish the state. Right? They wanted to establish countries for the people around the Middle East. And one of those countries was going to be a country for Jews. And that's the mandate of Palestine given to the British. The British were here to help the Jews establish a Jewish national home in Palestine, right, as it was called back then. That process started, but eventually was hijacked by Arab terrorism here in this land, led by extremist Arab leaders who do not want there to be a Jewish state, based on the unfortunate religious tenet in Islam that Jews can't have power and control of this land. That if it was once in the hands of Muslims, as it was under the Ottomans, it must either stay or quickly return to, and definitely not any control in the hands of the Jews. And that's something that a lot of people still don't understand. That's really what has been fueling this conflict that is now over 100 years. It really started around 1920. Right, when the Arab community sees, again, led by extremist Arab leaders, that the Jews are being told by the world that they can have a state here, right? That's when the fight against the Jews and the fight against Zionism begins in this land. Long story short, over the next couple of decades, the 1920s and 1930s, there are waves of riots, Arab riots against the Jews here. At the same time, more and more Jews are coming to the land of Israel. The Zionist leadership is establishing more and more of the things that they need to have their own country: commerce, economics, industry, education, labor, all kinds of things like that, leadership structures, and they're working very well and steadily towards the day when they will be ready to have their own country and tell the British, "Thank you very much for being here, for helping us along the way. We're now ready for you to leave." But unfortunately, the British did not want to leave. The British could have left in 1939. The Jewish people were ready here for statehood, and unfortunately, they didn't. And in the middle part of the 1930s was the worst wave of Arab riots against the Jews in those years. And as a result, I'm not sure if you hear that bird, but that's what it means to be outside in the land of Israel on Yom Ha'atzmaut, on Israel Independence Day. 1939, in reaction to these intense riots against the Jews, they punished the Jews basically, and they passed what's called a white paper, a piece of legislation saying that the Jews, they blame the problems. Too many Jews are coming to the land of Israel. We need to limit Jewish immigration into the land. They limited where Jews can purchase land and settle in the land that was supposed to be their country. I know it sounds absurd, but that was what happened. And they limited immigration coming into this land. The year was 1939. It was a few months before the Holocaust began, World War II. And the British basically passed a death sentence against millions of Jews in Europe because they passed this white paper called the MacDonald White Paper. And you can look it up online and find out more details about it, which said that Jewish immigration into the land of Israel, into Palestine, as it was called back then, is limited to 75,000 Jews over the next 5 years. As if someone knew what was about to happen. Obviously, they didn't, but it's so eerie that they basically passed this horrible piece of legislation, which kept Jews in Europe who needed a home so badly from coming to this place, one of the only places, and not the only place, that would take them in the entire world. I remember in 1938 at the Evian conference, 32 countries got together, and basically they all said, "Well, we can't help the Jews. We can't really bring them in. Sorry." That also led to the death sentence of millions of Jews in Europe. But in 1939, the MacDonald White Paper was horrifying to the Jewish people. And shortly after, again, World War II begins, and the Holocaust begins as well. Let's jump to the end of World War II. The Jews are more ready than ever, obviously, for their own country, for their own state, right? And then the next steps are taken towards statehood. And again, let's go back just for a second to say that even though it was written into international legislation, basically with the League of Nations after World War I, that the Jewish people could have a state here in this land, all right? And it was meant to be just a Jewish state, no other state, a Jewish state, literally from the river to the sea, literally from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. After World War II, limitations on immigration continued, and the Arab fight against Zionism continued as well. And eventually the British got fed up, and there was such chaos in this land. It was a triangular conflict between the British, the Jews, and the Arabs. And in 1947, they went to the newly formed United Nations and said, "We're done. We can't deal with this anymore. You guys deal with it." And the UN came, investigated, and came up with the UN Partition Plan. right? The UN partition plan split what was left of the Mandate of Palestine, because it was actually really much bigger at the beginning. It included what we know as the modern state of Jordan today and Israel, but Jordan was cut off early on in the years of the Mandate of Palestine. But what was left from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, that was cut into two, according to the UN partition plan. And the Jews, even though they knew that it was all meant to be theirs, they said, you know what? We have to agree to it. This is the first time in 2,000 years where you've been getting a real offer. Of course, we're going to say yes. And they did. It passed the UN, and the Jews were celebrating around the world, and the Arabs were getting ready for war. And that's exactly what happened the next day after the vote in the UN, the end of November 1947. War began here that lasted approximately a year and a half against both Arabs living in this land and Arab countries surrounding this land. And I'm not going to go into the whole story of the war, but of course, Israel wins the War of Independence. And in the middle of the war, you would think at the end of the war they declared independence. No, in the middle of the war, 6 months into the war, on May 14th, 1948, they declared independence in a ceremony in Tel Aviv. Why then? Why that day? Because that night, midnight between May 14th and May 15th, the British were leaving completely. They had spent those 6 months packing up, so to speak, because they had 100,000 soldiers here, lots of infrastructure, lots of buildings, lots to pack up. And by midnight of between May 14th and May 15th, they were going to be completely gone. And the Jews knew that if the Jewish leadership here, the Zionist leadership, they knew that if they did not declare independence then, there would be a power vacuum, and who knows what would be. So they quickly threw together a Declaration of Independence at a Declaration of Independence signing ceremony, and they declared independence on May 14th. And that was right in the middle of the war. The British were out a few hours later, and a few hours later, the next phase of the War of Independence began with Arab countries attacking all around, led by Egypt. Okay, so that's a little bit of the establishment of the State of Israel. Just know, right, as much as people scream out there that Israel has no right to exist, no legal right to exist, look at the facts, look at the history. Israel has every legal right to exist, right? And you can see it very, very clearly, starting with the League of Nations mandate for Palestine issued after World War I. All right. Let's tell the story of the signing ceremony, because that's another amazing story. Again, things were happening so quickly. They're in the middle of the war. The first 6 months of the War of Independence was a local war, more like a civil war between Jews living in Palestine and Arabs living in Palestine. Only after the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the British leaving, did the countries around Israel join in on literally the first day of its birth, a few hours after being created. But it wasn't so clear to everyone in the Zionist leadership that they should even declare a state now, because all the Arab countries around threatened Israel, warned Israel, saying that if you do dare declare independence, we are going to attack you, and the Jews living in our countries are going to be in grave danger. There were almost 1 million Jews, about 850,000 Jews living in Arab lands at the time. And the Muslim leaders threatened that they would be in grave danger if the Jews dared to declare a state in Israel. They deliberated, they met for many days. In the end, they had a vote, the Zionist cabinet leadership here, and the vote passed by one vote. By one vote, they passed to declare a state. It could have gone so easily the other way, and the state never would have been declared. Thank God it was declared. And then they had about 3 days to prepare for and plan for the signing ceremony. Of course, they wanted to have the signing in Jerusalem. That's the natural place to do it. It is eternal capital of the Jewish people. But that was under siege. It was the middle of the war. It was under siege. Jews couldn't get in or out. So they did the next best thing, and that was in Tel Aviv, right, the new Jewish city on the coast. And they held it in an art museum that used to be the house of the first mayor of the city of Tel Aviv, one of the first residents of Tel Aviv. And they set up in a room that was kind of dug into the ground. It was like, you have to take a few steps down. It was a little bit below for safety. They wanted to keep it very, very secret, hush-hush. Don't really tell many people about it because they don't want the Arab countries to know about it. They were afraid that they would be bombed if they did know where it was. So they sent out 300 invitations to 300 guests, telling it where, when, and to keep it a secret. It was set for 4 p.m. Friday, just a few hours before Shabbat, May 14th, 1948. Now, Jews aren't good at keeping secrets, and the secret got out, and thousands of people came outside this art museum to get a glimpse, to hear, to be there. And the ceremony begins. Now, one of the hardest parts of preparing for this ceremony was what to write in the Declaration of Independence. I'm not sure if you've heard this joke before, but 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? How are you going to get a group of Jews to agree on such an important document in such a short amount of time? They deliberated back and forth, hours and hours and hours, what to say, what not to say. In the end, they got it done. They finished it so last minute that they didn't have time to put it on the nice parchment. David Ben-Gurion, who was, reading out the Declaration at the ceremony, was reading off of typed paper. You can see it online. Right? Only afterwards they put it onto parchment. But they also needed to come up with the chairs and the table and the microphone and everything else, and they had to run around Tel Aviv, literally borrowing things from stores and cafes around town. Right. One of the most humorous parts of the story, I think, is that they needed a microphone for the ceremony. So they went to like this radio shop and they said, "Hey, can we borrow a microphone?" I was like, "What do you mean borrow a microphone? I don't want you guys to mess it up." They said, "No, but it's for something really important." Like, "What is it for?" "We can't really tell you." So I'm not going to help you. Okay, so we'll tell you. They told them that it was going to be for the Independence Declaration of Independence ceremony. So he said, "Great, I'll loan it to you, but just put this little plaque on the microphone. It's the name of my store. And you can see it's called Steel, which means sound. And in all the famous pictures from that day, from that ceremony, you can see this guy's, the name of his shop. Really, really funny. Anyway, 4 o'clock arrives. All the guests arrive. All the people who are going to be signing the declaration arrive, led by David Ben-Gurion. And he begins, and it's very, very short, 20-something minutes long. The whole thing's done. He reads out the declaration. And that's the first time that people actually hear the name of the Jewish state. They didn't know what it was going to be called. People were thinking maybe Judea, Zion, Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel. Israel is going to be the name, right? It's an emotional time, an emotional moment. Golda Meir, who was there and signed, she wrote in her diary later that she was crying while she wrote it because just 10 years before, she was sitting at the Evian conference when these 32 countries got together to see what we can do about the Jews in Germany, and nobody did anything. She wanted to speak. She wanted to speak on behalf of the Jewish people here in this land of Israel. Nobody would let her. She was only allowed to sit there and listen. And she listened to a whole world say, "No, sorry, we can't help the Jews." And 10 years later, she was sitting there at the ceremony signing in the Declaration of Independence. And of course, unfortunately, and so intensely sadly, in those in-between years, the Holocaust happened. Right? And it could have been avoided if independence was gained earlier, and those in power allowed it to happen. But again, that's another story. So that was the ceremony, an amazing time. It ended with the singing of Hatikva, Israel's national anthem. That was the first time that it was sung and played in the state of Israel. Right, it was written many years beforehand and sung many times, but that was the first time it was sung in the newly born state of Israel. And then Israel went off to continue the war, which it won eventually in 1949. And now we're celebrating 76 years. Thank God, 76 years of independence. And as if you saw my video yesterday, you know that here in Israel, the day before Independence Day is Memorial Day. We have a siren at night, a siren in the morning, where the entire country stands, stops, and listens to that siren to give honor, to give memory to all those who have fallen, all the soldiers and all of the victims of terror who have fallen in all of these years of the state, even going back before the state. Right, over 25,000 Israelis have been killed since. And it's a powerful day. It's an emotional day, especially this year, since October 7th. Over 1,500 additional Israelis were killed this year as a result of this horrible, horrible war that we're in right now against horrible, horrible, evil forces. But right from there, we go into the celebration of Yom Ha'atzmaut, of Independence Day. It's an unbelievable switch of emotion and of energy and of atmosphere And Israelis know how to do that. Right? We've lived over 3,000 years, an emotional roller coaster up and down all around. And it's what we do here in Israel as well. And today is Independence Day, and Israelis, they go out, they go to the beaches, they go out to hiking trails, they get together for barbecues and picnics. In the religious community here, they say special prayers of thanks to God that we have this state. In my community, we said it last night with unbelievable celebration, musical instruments and dancing for hours. Same thing this morning. But really, whether Israelis are religious or not, secular or not, there's an incredible atmosphere on this day of gratitude and celebration and enjoying this land. As I said, going out to this land, you can see it's a beautiful day. We're going to be going out really soon, meeting up with friends and going on a beautiful hike, coming back for a nice picnic. Right? And it's just a day of such celebration and such recognition. Wow, we are so fortunate to be alive at this time to be part of this incredible story of the Jewish people coming home to their land, living in the land of Israel, our ancient homeland, right? And living in the modern state of Israel, which for every single moment of its existence is at the fight against forces of evil and forces trying to destroy it. And thank God we've been successful, and God willing, we'll continue to be successful. And as we do that, we're still able to create a beautiful country, a successful country, a country that exports more innovations, inventions, and life-changing and life-saving technology than any other country in the world. It's unbelievable what's happening here. It's an incredible story. And we're blessed to be alive, to witness it, to be part of it. So wishing you a happy Israel Independence Day. Thank you for your continued love and support of this incredible country. All the best, and God bless.